In the shadowed halls of a palace built on fear and opulence, whispers carried like poisoned wind. Nobles, once confident in their privileges, now shivered behind golden doors, trembling not from armies or plots, but from the cruel amusement of a ruler whose pleasures knew no bounds. This tyrant did not conquer with sword or decree. He conquered with desire twisted into terror. Every chamber, every banquet, every masked ball was a stage for his games, and the court was forced to play along or face consequences so unspeakable they left men and women broken in body and spirit. He moved through his court like a predator, eyes calculating, smile curling with sadistic delight. Courtiers whispered of disappearances, of whispered screams behind locked doors, and of promises to reward obedience with indulgence, only to punish disobedience with unimaginable torment. Fear and fascination intertwined in every glance his subjects dared to steal. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with secrets, carrying the echoes of pleasure warped into agony. And yet, this was no private vice. It was an instrument of power. The nobility, once untouchable, were reminded that their titles and lands meant nothing in the presence of his whims. Consent was irrelevant, resistance fatal. The air in the palace was thick with anxiety, every smile hiding a question. Who would be chosen next? Who would be forced to participate in his deviance? And who would be destroyed for daring to refuse? As the sun set beyond the high towers, the court's gold and velvet shimmered with a veneer of normalcy. But behind every curtain, the pulse of dread quickened. For in this palace, desire was law, cruelty was sport, and no one, not even the most powerful nobles, could claim immunity from the tyrant's games. History rarely speaks of rulers who ruled through terror made sexual. This story is of one such tyrant, whose name became synonymous with fear, lust, and ruin. Once, this palace had been a symbol of splendor and power, a place where diplomacy, strategy, and alliances shaped the fate of nations. Nobles had walked its corridors with confidence, certain that titles and wealth could protect them. Masquerades dazzled, banquets overflowed with exotic delicacies, and music floated above the marbled halls like a promise of order. It was a kingdom where appearances mattered, where loyalty could be rewarded with gold or favor, and where the court believed it controlled the whims of the crown. But all that changed the moment he inherited the throne. The tyrant did not respect tradition, law, or decency. The polished elegance of the palace became a stage for horrors disguised as entertainments. Power, once a distant abstraction, was made terrifyingly personal. Every noble, every servant, every guest was reminded that authority had shifted from lineage and duty to his unpredictable, sadistic desires. The splendor that once inspired awe now cloaked a darkness no one could ignore. Contrast became the ruler's weapon. Diplomats arrived expecting strategy and received games of humiliation. Courtiers sought audience for favors, only to find themselves ensnared in twisted challenges designed to test obedience and break pride. Gifts, promises, and even whispers of love were all tools to manipulate, expose, and terrify. Power and pleasure were inseparable. Cruelty dripped from every crown, every scepter, and every velvet drapery. By the time the sun set behind the palace towers, the court understood that nothing was safe. Not secrets, not honor, not virtue. The nobility were no longer rulers within their estates. They were actors, pawns, and victims in a drama orchestrated by a tyrant whose appetite for control had no moral boundaries. What had once been a kingdom of refinement was now a labyrinth of fear, and every choice, every glance, every whispered word could either save a life or condemn it. Born into opulence, yet shadowed by obsession, he entered the world in a gilded chamber where whispers of power were louder than lullabies. His father, a ruler obsessed with legacy, demanded from his earliest days. he learned that desire was currency and that influence could be bent to whim or fear. Games were his education, and cruelty became his teacher. In youth, he displayed brilliance and charm that masked a growing hunger for control. Tutors admired his intellect, unaware that lessons of law and politics were only tools he would later twist to serve personal appetites. At court, he observed the courtiers' secrets, the alliances and betrayals, the quiet manipulations that built empires. These early lessons shaped a man who understood the delicate intersection of fear and favor, knowledge and lust. By adolescence, his appetites had emerged, a fascination not merely with power, but with testing the limits of those who surrounded him. Where peers sought friendship, he sought leverage. Where others courted reputation, he dissected pride. Courtiers' laughter became an orchestra of signals. Nobles' flattery, a map of vulnerabilities. Every interaction was a puzzle, every glance a potential weapon. Yet even then, there were moments hinting at the man's complexity. In rare solitude, he studied texts on philosophy, human behavior, and governance. Curious not for morality, but for insight. He understood that fear could be more binding than love, that shame could shape obedience more effectively than reward. And so, by the time he ascended, the foundations of his tyranny were already laid, an intricate fusion of intellect, appetite, and merciless calculation. In the palace, shadows of his upbringing whispered constantly, guiding him to blend pleasure and terror. By adulthood, the world had become his stage, and every noble, every servant, every ambassador, a potential participant in the games he was destined to play. The roots of cruelty, planted in youth, had grown deep, promising a reign where nothing, not even desire itself, would remain innocent. The first cracks in his courtly veneer appeared not in grand battles, but in whispered corridors and candlelit chambers. A noble's daughter, famed for her beauty and wit, refused the subtle advances of the young tyrant. Her defiance, though polite, was a spark in a palace built on submission. What began as playful pursuit quickly curdled into obsession. Rebuffed, he realized that charm alone could not bend her will. Fear would. It was in this moment that the true nature of his power emerged. Servants, previously dismissed as background, became instruments of surveillance. Confidants, once loyal, were tested against impossible moral dilemmas. The girl's every movement, her laughter, even the tilt of her head, was recorded and analyzed. The court watched in silent terror, sensing that an unstoppable force had awoken, a man who could turn desire into torment, seduction into punishment. Rebellion, where resistance arose, he responded with cruelty masked as entertainment. Secret punishments were devised, lessons in submission delivered with chilling precision. Courtiers whispered warnings, but none dared confront him. The very air of the palace seemed charged with anticipation, as if the walls themselves knew that innocence and defiance were currencies he would exploit mercilessly. Yet, paradoxically, this period also revealed his cunning. While the nobility squirmed beneath the weight of his gaze, he maintained the appearance of civility. To outsiders, he was still a charismatic prince, a man of refined tastes and intelligence. But inside, every smile hid a calculation, every gesture a potential trap. The first turning point had arrived. He had learned that terror, mingled with desire, was more binding than loyalty, and that no one, not even those closest to him, could escape the intricate web he was beginning to weave. From this moment onward, the court would never again know peace. Every banquet, every ball, every conversation became a stage for psychological games, each more daring, more terrifying than the last. The tyranny of pleasure had begun, and the noble class, once confident in their power and privilege, would learn that submission could be enforced without a single sword. Only a mind as merciless as it was brilliant. Behind gilded doors and velvet curtains, the tyrant's personal life became the stage for scandal the kingdom would never forget. His passions, once private, now dictated the rhythm of the court. Secret meetings in shadowed alcoves, forbidden trysts with those he should never touch, whispers of favors exchanged for loyalty, all became currency in a world where moral lines no longer existed. Noble families trembled as their daughters, wives, and even sons were drawn into his labyrinth of desire and humiliation. No one was safe. Courtiers who once smiled in confidence now flinched at every glance, their every word scrutinized for signs of rebellion. Loyalty became a dangerous gamble, and even the most trusted aides lived in constant dread, unsure if compliance would protect them or merely delay the inevitable. Rumors swirled like wildfire, tales of nights spent in secret chambers, of servants caught between obedience and terror, of grotesque punishments meted out for minor slights. Each story more horrifying than the last. Some claimed that he reveled not in conquest alone, but in the psychological collapse of his victims, measuring fear and shame as meticulously as a general counts his army. Yet, in the midst of scandal, he cultivated an image of charm and sophistication. Outwardly, he appeared a man of refinement, a prince of intellect and taste, concealing the horror beneath a polished veneer. This contrast, the seductive prince versus the cruel manipulator, made him even more terrifying. The court was trapped between fascination and horror, compelled to admire the brilliance even as they feared the brutality. The line between personal indulgence and political control blurred completely. Every affair, every scandal became a lesson in power. He had discovered that scandal itself could rule as effectively as armies or laws. By turning private desire into public terror, he ensured that no noble, no matter how high their rank, could feel safe. His personal life was no longer his own. It had become a weapon, a spectacle, and a warning, all rolled into one inescapable, shocking tapestry of fear. As whispers of his depravity spread, a deeper, darker plot began to take shape, not against the tyrant alone, but against the very foundation of the nobility. Behind closed doors, alliances shattered. Families who once held power now squabbled over protection, bribery, and the chance to survive the tyrant's unpredictable whims. Every corridor, every banquet hall became a theater of suspicion. The tyrant, ever cunning, exploited this chaos. He placed spies among servants, bribed scribes to document transgressions, and manipulated messengers to twist words into accusations. No conversation was safe. No whisper went unheard. Friends became informants. Confidences were weaponized, and the palace itself transformed into a labyrinth of fear. Even nobles of the highest rank found themselves ensnared in plots they had not conceived. Some conspired to topple him, planning secret rebellions in the dead of night. Others sought to appease him, sacrificing honor, family, and dignity to avoid his wrath. Each decision could mean survival or public disgrace. One fateful night, a conspiracy of unimaginable scale nearly succeeded. A group of nobles, emboldened by desperation, planned to expose his scandalous indulgences before the entire court, hoping to finally wrest control. Yet the tyrant, anticipating betrayal, turned the plan into a trap. The conspirators were caught, humiliated, and punished in ways that would echo across generations. Their wealth and influence evaporated overnight, serving as a chilling reminder. Defiance would be met with spectacle and suffering. Through these schemes, the tyrant demonstrated a mastery over fear itself. Scandal, betrayal, and cruelty became instruments of governance. Each act, each conspiracy thwarted, reinforced his absolute control. The court had learned a terrible lesson. In his hands, personal desires became political weapons, private scandals became public punishment, and loyalty was measured not by affection, but by trembling compliance. The kingdom now existed in a suspended state of terror, every noble aware that the next act of drama could strike their family, fortune, or life itself. His power was no longer merely physical. It had become psychological, suffocating, and immortal, leaving the entire realm dancing to the rhythm of his dark desires. The culmination of his cruelty arrived like a storm that no one could evade. What had begun as whispered fears escalated into a public spectacle designed to crush both pride and hope. One by one, those who had attempted to defy him were dragged before the court, their dignity stripped, their secrets laid bare for all to witness. The tyrant's gaze burned with a mixture of delight and malice, a predator savoring the chaos he had crafted. In a grand hall, illuminated by flickering torches, the tyrant orchestrated his most infamous act. Nobles, once untouchable pillars of the kingdom, were subjected to humiliations both intimate and degrading, designed to remind everyone that power rested entirely in the hands of one man. Even those who had never crossed him trembled, forced to witness scenes that would be spoken of in hushed tones for decades. Every gasp, every stifled cry, every forced bow served as testimony to the absolute dominion of terror. Yet, as he reveled in dominance, a fatal flaw revealed itself: overconfidence. In the midst of orchestrating another scandal, he underestimated the very people he had humiliated and manipulated for years. Quiet alliances formed in secret, born from the shared desire to end his reign of terror. A single spark ignited a chain reaction. Trusted aides betrayed his movements. Whispers of plots turned into action, and the nobles, driven by fear and vengeance, converged against him in a calculated storm. The tyrant fought with rage, but the walls of his power crumbled faster than he could comprehend. His carefully maintained network of spies and enforcers faltered under the weight of collective defiance. The same halls that had amplified his cruelty now echoed with his downfall. His spectacles of power, once a symbol of dominance, became cages from which there was no escape. By the end, the tyrant was left exposed, stripped of authority and respect. Public humiliation, the very instrument he had wielded with precision, was now turned upon him. The once untouchable ruler, feared and loathed in equal measure, fell not to swords alone, but to the cumulative weight of the suffering, fear, and betrayal he had inflicted upon his kingdom. The echoes of his reign would linger, a cautionary tale of lust for power, moral corruption, and the inevitable collapse that follows unchecked cruelty. When the tyrant's reign finally ended, the kingdom was left in stunned silence. The nobles who had endured his sexual games and humiliations began to reclaim their dignity, yet the scars of terror lingered. The courts that once echoed with forced laughter and whispered fears were now somber, haunted by memories of debauchery and manipulation. Every corridor, every hall, every shadowed chamber carried the weight of what had been endured, a silent testament to a man whose lust for control had shaken even the highest seats of power. Stories spread quickly, passed from generation to generation, chronicling the depravity of a ruler who had weaponized desire against his subjects. His games, once considered private scandals, became cautionary tales, warnings of how unchecked authority can twist intimacy into terror. Even centuries later, historians would note the intricate balance between fear and fascination, the ways in which a ruler's private indulgences could govern the fate of an entire nobility. Yet, amidst the horror, some resilience emerged. The kingdom learned to fortify itself against the unchecked whims of those in power. Laws were revised, alliances strengthened, and the memory of the tyrant's games became a tool. Survivors of his court, once silent in terror, now spoke openly of injustice, reclaiming their voices and rewriting the narrative that had once been dominated by fear. The tyrant himself faded into legend, not as a king to be admired, but as a dark figure whose lust for control consumed both him and the lives of those around him. His name became synonymous with corruption, his deeds recounted as grim parables of human weakness, manipulation, and moral decay. The nobility, once paralyzed by terror, emerged stronger, tempered by the trials of survival and the knowledge that cruelty has consequences. History remembers him, not for the empire he ruled, but for the terror he inflicted, the silence he demanded, and the lessons he inadvertently left behind. In the end, the true legacy of his reign was not power, nor wealth, nor conquest. It was the enduring memory of fear and the enduring courage of those who survived to tell the tale. History does not immortalize lust or cruelty. It immortalizes the courage of those who endure it. The tyrant's games may have ruled the halls in fear, but they could not silence the voices of resilience. Power used to corrupt and dominate always leaves a mark, not of glory, but of warning. And in that warning lies the truth. Tyranny, no matter how seductive or terrifying, is never eternal.